One thing I've noticed is that people love to tell me their pet peeves. It's an easy icebreaker when I meet someone new. And I often hear that people think language change is the result of dumbing down the language or pandering to the lowest common denominator. And I have always believed that isn't true. Language is more than a set of fixed rules. The natural behavior of language is to change. And I like to think of it as a democratic process. We vote for and against words with the way we use them every day. In English, unlike in French, for example, we don't have one organization that tells us how we should use our language. Instead, we the people, we vote. You don't have to love every change, but I hope that by the end of my talk, you'll find language change as fascinating as I do. But first, let's get back to those feelings of annoyance, because they aren't new. Language was changing way back in the 1400s, and it annoyed William Caxton, who ran the first English printing press. In his time, they had regional dialects, just as we do today. And eggs and Aaron were both words for eggs. Aaron was the en plural, like children and oxen, that we still use today. And it annoyed Caxton that he had to deal with these two different words that meant the same thing. Near the end of his life, he wrote, "Lo, what should a man in these days now write, eggs or Aaron?" Certainly, it is hard to please every man because of diversity and change of language. And I think in general, people just don't like change. I mean, in the 1490s, people were complaining about language change near the dawn of commercial printing in English. And I think they've been complaining every day since. For the English language, there are no good old days. So people don't like change. If you've ever redesigned a website, for example, you know to expect complaints. The new design always feels wrong. It's not what people are used to. And they think, why did they move my button? Well, it's the same with language. People think, what does this new word mean? And why are people suddenly saying something different, such as they did something on accident instead of by accident? Our gut reaction is, I don't like it. But trying to resist inevitable language change is like trying to resist changes in fashion. Our words, just like our clothes, identify us in a place and time and tell people what groups we belong to or what groups we aspire to belong to. In fact, grammar and usage guides emerged as a category during a time when people were thinking more about changing their groups. In Britain, in the 1800s, people bought millions of grammar and usage guides because they wanted to improve their language so they could fit into high society. Remember, don't think of language change as dumbing down the language. Think of it as a democratic process. We vote. In Caxton's time, people voted for eggs over Aaron. But there was nothing inherently better about eggs, nothing morally superior about the word eggs. It just won the popular vote. And there are many ways we vote for and against language change. Words can gain or lose meanings, for example. Today, we think of egregious as meaning something bad. We may talk about egregious crimes or egregious hypocrisy. But egregious used to mean both outstandingly bad and outstandingly good. But we voted for that bad meaning. People used the bad meaning more, and the positive meaning, it just faded away. Like Aaron, the positive meaning of egregious lost the vote. Our language got simpler, but I don't think of that as a dumbing down. Sometimes pure silliness leads to language change. According to Alan Metcalf, who wrote an entire book about the word okay, it is one of the most successful English words on the planet, one of the most recognized English words. But it comes from something you may think of as pandering to the lowest common denominator. In the 1830s, journalists joked around, creating funny abbreviations based on misspellings. And okay comes from all correct, an intentional misspelling of all correct. But then Martin Van Buren used it in his presidential campaign because his nickname was Old Kinderhooks, and he called his supporters the OK Club. And this silly abbreviation caught on. About 65 years later, people started spelling it as a whole word, I presume trying to give it more legitimacy. But today, despite its silly origin, I never hear anyone complain that okay, one of our most successful English words, comes from dumbing down the language or pandering to the lowest common denominator. We voted, and enough people liked okay that it gets to be part of standard English. One unsavory reason people sometimes vote against language change is because words come from people they don't like. Americanisms, for example, have often been disparaged by the British. In the 1700s, Benjamin Franklin and John Adams both used the word lengthy, and it was sniffed at by the British as an Americanism. Around 1900, you can find usage guides that called using the word drapes to mean curtains an error and an Americanism. But we continued to use those words. We voted for them. And today, nobody comes up to me at parties and says it drives them crazy when people use the word drapes or lengthy. Many of you may have been taught not to use the word done to mean finished. It's not a rule most experts today support, by the way. And some people speculate that the feelings against done may have been rooted in discrimination against the Scottish and Irish, because done had been used for many years in English to mean finished, and the writings against it suspiciously started to emerge during a time when there was a big uptick in Scottish and Irish immigration. And Scottish and Irish people tend to use done more than other people who speak English. The people who started writing don't use done to mean finished never gave a reason why they had that advice. And some people think that what they really meant was don't talk like those immigrants. Sometimes experts take illogical stands against words, and despite their authority, we vote against them. If you read Strunk and White's famous book, The Elements of Style, you'll find a weird section in which Strunk advises us not to use the word clever. It turns out he just didn't like the word. He thought it was overused. And despite his authority, we ignored him and continued to use clever without fear. Lindley Murray, who was one of those massively influential grammarians in Britain who sold his usage guides to social climbers, he thought we shouldn't use the word who to refer to babies. He thought who should be reserved for rational beings. Essentially, he thought babies didn't qualify as people. And I first heard that story from the amazing Corey Stamper at Merriam-Webster. And I love it because it is such a wonderful reminder that the things we think of as rules weren't handed down by God or even men who always get things right. Sometimes They have ideas such as don't use the word clever, or we shouldn't refer to babies as who. The rules are not above being questioned and revised. Finally, I'll leave you with two more modern examples, because maybe you're thinking, well, yeah, language change in the past was fine and normal, but language change today shouldn't happen or doesn't happen. First, I often hear complaints about people who say things such as graduated college or graduated high school instead of graduated from college. But what most people don't realize is that graduated from college used to be the wrong way to say it. Our grandparents and great-grandparents, they preferred was graduated from college. So when my parents said Mignon graduated from college, they were dumbing down the language in the eyes of their parents because they left out the word was. But my parents' generation voted with their usage, and they made graduated from college, graduated from high school the standard, the normal way to say it. Now it appears people may be voting again, this time in favor of simply graduated college, graduated high school. It hasn't won yet, but people are campaigning for it with the way they speak and write. I hear it all the time. And if you don't like it, you are campaigning against it. There's an active campaign going on in English right now around this phrase. Finally, I recently chose adulting as my up-and-coming new word of the year. It's popular on social media, and people use it to describe doing grown-up things. So you will hear people bragging, I just bought insurance, I am adulting like a boss. And more often, you hear complaints, I missed the train again. Adulting is hard. About half the people who left a comment on my post about adulting hated the word, or don't like turning nouns into verbs in general. But what fascinates me about the word adulting is how parallel it is to the word parenting, which is a lot newer than you probably think. Parenting debuted as a word only about 100 years ago, and it didn't start being widely used until the mid-1970s. But today, you're hard-pressed to find someone who hears the word parenting and thinks it sounds ridiculous, or like someone turned a noun into a verb, like they immediately think when they hear the word adulting. And the biggest difference is just how long people have had to get used to hearing the word. People may or may not vote for adulting to become part of standard English alongside parenting. That's not really the point. The point is that language changes. Sometimes a word such as drapes succeeds for reasons we can't explain. And sometimes a ridiculous word such as okay wins because it had a fantastic PR campaign behind it. But old and new language can tell us fascinating things about our culture. That a long time ago, people weren't sure if babies should be called who. That when we stopped thinking of children as miniature adults, we started talking about parenting. And that something about the lives of people in their 20s today has made some of them embrace the word adulting. Language changes. You don't have to love every new word. And of course, we should teach people to write well. That's my job. That's what I do. But I'd also like you to see language change as the interesting, normal, and delightful thing it can be. I'll leave you with this one idea. Wanting people to write well and loving and embracing the fluid hodgepodge nature of our language are not mutually exclusive. Thank you.